Welcome everyone to the advisory committee meeting. Today is April 1st, Wednesday, the 1st of April, and we are online doing this via Zoom. I'd like to confirm that we have a quorum online. I'm going to read the advisory committee roll, and please state that you are affirmatively present. Let us begin with, go to the top of this list here. Pardon me while I juggle. Jackie?
Here, present.
Thank you, that's Jackie Katz. Excuse me, Brian Beachkovsky?
Here.
Susan Klein?
Here.
Jonathan Hurwitz? We'll have to unmute you, Jonathan.
Sorry, present.
Outstanding, well done. Kristen Baelish?
Present.
And Mike, I'm sorry, is it Huff?
Here.
Okay, outstanding. And myself, so that is, if I missed anybody, myself, Arthur Franzak, the committee chair. Have I missed any advisory committee members?
Did Susan Klein speak? Okay,
Yes,
thank you, sorry.
Yes, you did, that's fine. Okay, so thank you for confirming. Now, staff who are online tonight, we have, of course, Susan Jacobson, who assists the advisory committee. Thank you, Susan, for being here. We, from the town, we have Blythe Robinson, our town administrator. Blythe, could you confirm?
Yep, I'm here.
We also have Todd from the finance department. Todd?
I'm here.
Excellent. And then we have some guests tonight. Kevin, who often joins us, which I appreciate, from the select board. Kevin Calcutt is with us. We also have our first guest, Dr. Alardi, who will be presenting information from the Norfolk Public Schools proposed budget. Our agenda is going to be to have both budget presentations tonight. And I think that covers the preliminaries. As you know, this is all being recorded. And that is it. So having said that, again, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand. I will be watching the magic hand roster. When you put it up, I will then call on you. I would appreciate first letting Dr. Lardy complete her presentations. Then when we get to questions, I will moderate that. And with that being said, please walk us through, Dr. Lardy.
We also do have two budget subcommittee members from the school committee that are going to join us tonight. I saw Medora on earlier, Medora Champagne, and Paul Cochran is also joining us. I can't see on my screen whether he has joined yet, but he will be joining us tonight.
I am here.
All
He's
right.
there.
Thanks. All right, so I will start first of all by thanking you for arranging a virtual meeting. I'm sure this has been a challenge for all of you, as it has been for us over the past few weeks. So I'd like to begin by just sharing a brief presentation of our school budget request. This is the same presentation that we did share with the public at our public hearing earlier in March. And hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have a good sense of what our expense needs, our staffing needs for next year will be, and how our budget compares to other area communities. So let me just to start, to frame our work, we always begin our budget process by thinking about the mission and vision statement for the Norfolk schools. As all of our budgets are challenging at this time, we really think about when we're making budget decisions, what's going to have the greatest impact on learning and achievement for our students. So you can read the vision and mission, but our mission is to create a safe, joyful, and challenging learning environment that meets the needs of our diverse students, and through family community partnerships to provide an education that inspires lifelong learners and cultivates caring and productive citizens of our ever-changing world. So the presentation tonight will have 5 main parts. We want to start by providing information for the advisory about our budget history and how our per pupil spending compares to other comparison districts. We'll talk a little bit about the 2021 budget request and what our budget drivers are, provide an overview of our enrollment and class size projections, and then talk about some of the savings efforts that we've put in place. I know that KP is coming next. We've done a lot of partnering around budget to realize savings for both districts. So I'll highlight some of those and then talk about some of the things that we will need to consider in the future, but we are not bringing forward at this time because we do recognize that the town has some budget restraints this year. And then we'll talk a little bit about the return on investment. So starting with the budget history and the per pupil spending comparisons, I think it's really important when you're looking at our budget request to look at the budget history over the past 10 years. Back in the years prior to 2008, the Norfolk Public Schools, as well as the town, had a significant recession. And during those periods of time, the district had to make significant cuts to both staffing and to programs. Typically for us to bring forward our current staff and all of the programs that we have, it usually takes a budget increase of 2.5% to 3% every year. So when you look at the long-term history, you can see that there was a period of time between 2008 and 2013 where the district had annual budget increases of 1%. There were actually 2 years where there were negative budget increases or negative budget numbers. We had a negative increase, negative 9.96 in FY10 and a negative 4% in FY11. Cumulatively over time, in order to manage those budgets, we lost a lot of staffing, we lost our foreign language program, we lost enrichment teachers, and the last few years we've been fortunate and we've been able to start some rebuilding. At the same time that the district experienced significant budget challenges, both the federal and state entitlement grants and allocations that we received to supplement our budget were also declining. So over that same period of time, our grant funding decreased by almost $500,000. And the state also implemented quite a few unfunded mandates. We have new curriculum standards in every content area. Over the last 8 years, the state's added mandates for professional development that we have to provide for all staff annually. McKinney-Vento transportation is a federal requirement that we provide transportation services at the district cost for any students that are homeless or become homeless during the time that they're enrolled with us. So if we have a student who loses their home and is temporarily housed in Medfield or in another local area, we have to provide at the district's cost transportation for that child from where they're temporarily residing back to school. States also implemented a bunch of English language learner regulations, which have required us to add an ELL teacher and increase staffing to support those programs. And there's been quite a few changes to student discipline and bullying laws. We also, as most of you are aware, have incurred some significant costs for some needed security and safety upgrades that we had to make to our facilities in response to the increased incidents we've seen across the country in school violence. Between the years 2014 and 2020, we've been really fortunate that the town has been able to support education at a higher level. So you'll see during that period of time, we saw better increases, 3.9%, 4%, actually 1 year of 4.7%. So during that period of time, we were able to start rebuilding some of the programs that were lost during the recession years. To give you a sense of where we are, over the last few years, we've been able to restore classroom teaching positions. So we have reasonable student and teacher ratios. We've been able to bring back some support positions. We've been able to restore funding for curriculum updates. So as I mentioned, we've had new curriculum frameworks issued by the states in every single core content area. Prior to 2008, we didn't have any funding in the budget for new curriculum materials. We've been able to bring that back, and we now have current programs in all of the major disciplines. We have partially restored our health education program. We used to have a separate health education teacher. We have not been able to bring that back fully. What we have done is to increase physical education to twice a week, and 2 out of every 8 physical education classes are dedicated to health instruction. We have partially restored our technology staff. We still have, we used to have a full-time district data specialist and a full-time technology director. Those 2 positions have been collapsed into 1, which is somewhat of a difficult to manage job, but we haven't been able to increase staffing in that area. We also used to have full-time librarians in both buildings. We now have a 0.8 librarian in each building, and we have a paraprofessional library assistant at Freeman Kennedy and no staffing support at the H. Olive Day. We were able over the past 8 years to eliminate fees that the district had to charge for transportation services. The state allows you to charge a transportation fee for students that live within 2 miles of the school. The school committee several years ago voted to eliminate those fees primarily because the assumption of the legislation is that students have a safe walking route to school. We don't have any sidewalks in Norfolk, and we don't have crossing guards. So it was somewhat inequitable to continue to charge a fee for those transportation services. We were also able to eliminate the tuition for our full-day kindergarten program, as at this point, 85% of districts across the Commonwealth have free full-day universal kindergarten. Things that are still pending that we haven't been able to address. During the recession years, we had to have fees for participation in the band program. We would love to see those eliminated so that we don't put financial barriers in the way for any student that wants to participate in our instrumental music program. But we haven't been able to reduce that, and part of the band teacher's salary is currently funded by fees from the program. We eliminated the foreign language program back in 2008 and have not had the revenue as of yet to restore that program. We've made clerical position reductions both in the central office as well as the Freeman Kennedy office that we have not yet been able to restore. We also had to reduce the special education team chair position. That's the person that is the liaison for families whose students are being tested or evaluated, who coordinates the meetings, and is the primary contact if parents have concerns regarding their child's educational program. We also had to eliminate, we used to have an enrichment teacher that consulted and worked to support enrichment instruction across the grades with all teachers. That position we have not been able to restore. If you look at that period of 10 years that I described, the average budget increase when you look at the recession years in addition to the rebuilding years is 2.25%. Actually, that's over 13 years. And that is a really fairly conservative view of school funding. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it does take us about 2.5% to 3% just to bring forward staff. So that's why we haven't been able to fully restore all the things that were lost during the recession years. This chart just gives you a sense of how Norfolk compares to the state as far as per pupil spending. This data is gathered by the Mass Department of Education every year. We're all required to do an end of year outside financial audit. All of our school spending is entered into the Mass Department of Ed's data system, and they draw that automatically and then put out per pupil comparisons that look at your overall budget divided by the number of students that you serve. If you look at that, this shows you 2013 to 2018. Back in 2013, we were about $1,000 under the state average for per pupil spending. In 2015, we were able to really almost close that gap and be right on par with the state. But we saw an enrollment spike in Norfolk beginning in 2015, and our increases in budget didn't keep up with that enrollment growth. So you'll see that that gap, where we were close to the state in 2015, that gap has continued to grow. And we are back to being about $1,100 under the state average at this point. The Department of Education provides every district with a set of comparison communities. We use those communities to benchmark our performance in terms of per pupil spending, in terms of looking at our MCAS and student achievement data, as well as a number of other different areas that we compare on. The districts that you see listed in this chart are the comparison districts that the Department of Education has identified for Norfolk. They are all districts that do not have a high school. High school costs are a little bit different than your elementary. They have teams, athletic programs, after school things. So these are just elementary, and some include a middle school. If you look at our comparison districts, you'll see in 2016-17, we were fourth from the bottom. So basically in the lower third of all the comparison districts for per pupil spending. That number has dropped down in 17 and 18, as well as 18 and 19. We are now the lowest spending district, with the exception of Berkeley. Both Rentham and Plainville have spent significantly more annually per pupil to educate students. So if you look at how we compare to the state, we spend on average over $1,000 less per pupil to educate our students. We currently have 990 students enrolled with us. So we spend almost $1 million less per year in education than other districts across the state. And looking at our 2021 budget request and some of the budget drivers, our total budget request at this point is 4.4%, or $561,547 over fiscal 2020. That was where our budget stood when we held the public hearing in March. We know that the town has a shortfall in terms of balancing the budget, and we've been asked to try to reduce that by $30,000. And we will work to do that. We just haven't had the opportunity since school closure to reconvene the school committee to take a look at how that would look. So my number probably doesn't match what you have in your packets right now at this point. Our budget request would allow us to maintain level services and to meet contractual obligations for steps and lane changes for our teachers and our paraprofessional staff, as well as clerical staff. We do need to add a classroom teacher next year, and that is to accommodate increasing enrollment that we are seeing at the kindergarten level. We have currently 150 students enrolled for kindergarten, which is about 28 students more than we had last year at this time. And based on the school committee class size policy, we need to run 8 sessions of kindergarten in order to keep the student-teacher ratio at a reasonable number. In addition, if we add a kindergarten classroom, we also have to add a paraprofessional staff member to support that classroom. We're also looking to add a 0.6 special education teacher, and that will support specialized programming for students that we have in a substantially separate program at the HL of Day who have global developmental delays. We have students in that program who've been with us for a number of years that will be aging out of the HL of Day and entering the Freeman Kennedy School next year. And we do not have a receiving program that would meet their needs at this time. So we actually have to build a new program. And that will allow us to keep students in district versus having to look at outplacements. We think that's ethically the right thing to do, but we also feel that we can provide stronger educational programming than most of the out-of-district placements offer at this point. We are also looking to increase the assistant principal position. Currently, we have a 0.5 assistant principal at the HL of Day, and we have a 0.5 assistant principal at the Freeman Kennedy School. The other half of their role, they are the HL of Day assistant principal is a 0.5 curriculum director for social studies and English language arts. And the assistant principal at Freeman is also a 0.5 curriculum director for math and science instruction. These jobs are incredibly demanding. They're really 2 full-time jobs squished into one. And with the increasing changes that we have had from the state as far as curriculum instruction, the changes in the teacher evaluation system that are generated by state regulations, the changes in student discipline law, bullying prevention law, it's just made both these positions unmanageable. So we have delayed bringing that request forward for a number of years. We have prioritized instructional positions, classroom materials, and everything that, as I said when I talked about our mission, that we felt would have the greatest impact on students. At this point, we feel that those positions are really critical to allowing us to continue to provide the high quality programs that we have offered. We also have in the past since I've been there in the last 7 years, we have had 5 different people in those 2 positions. Sorry, I have to make sure I'm changing the slides as I speak. This is just a breakdown of what our budget changes will look like for next year. The total cost for us of teacher step lane changes and an estimated COLA, we're in the middle of negotiating a new 3-year contract with our staff, is $326,728. For all other staff, we were budgeting a 2% COLA. That is based on work that we did to look at how our salaries compared with other districts. We've been having a very difficult time in Norfolk filling some of our non-union positions. So our food service positions, our SAC before and after care program, as well as some of our paraprofessional positions that have been open, we've been losing staff members to other competing regional districts. So the 2% will help us keep our salaries competitive with the market. We have that one classroom teacher ad at Age Olive Day for kindergarten that we're budgeting that at $64,000. We budget Masters 5 for a placeholder for new positions. The state requires people to have a master's now within their first few years of teaching. And typically we are able to recruit people with some level of experience. Kindergarten aid will support the new kindergarten program that's budgeted at $22,000. The assistant principal to create a full-time assistant in each building, we're budgeting at $95,000. The 0.6 special education teacher to build our new program is $34,000. We also will need to increase our occupational therapist position in order to accommodate those students coming up to Freeman Kennedy. That's 9, and we're looking for a 0.1 increase, which is actually a half day at $9,478. We, as I mentioned, we had to reduce our team chair position last year by 0.2. That's a full day. We have an increasing population of students receiving special education support. So over the past several years, we've gone from 15 to 18% of our students receiving specialized instruction. And we really need to increase that team chair position to accommodate those meetings and that role. We will be reducing a special ed paraprofessional next year for savings of $22,000. So the net increase in salaries is $609,000. On the expense side, we really worked hard to try to offset some of the salary needs by reducing expenses. We do have an increase of $4,400 for administrative technology. Most of my principals' laptops, and now they're all working from home remotely, they're 6 and 7 years old, and they're not ideal. They really need to be replaced and updated. So we're looking to replace the laptops for the principals and assistant principals. We do have a $29,000 ad for network technology. That was to for two different things, primarily to add Wi-Fi access to the Freeman Kennedy, replace some of our Aerohive units. We also need to renovate at the Age Olive Day school. We have a server room. We need to enclose the server in order to convert that back to an instructional space because we are out of spaces at Age Olive Day in order to accommodate the 2 new classrooms we need next year. So that's a $12,000 cost estimated in there. HOD supplies is increasing by $9,600. That is to furnish a new kindergarten classroom, desks, bookshelves, teacher desk, and curriculum materials. We've decreased the supply account at FK by almost $400. Special education instructional services is up by $36,000. This is really driven by individual students' needs and IEPs. Instructional services are primarily medical therapeutic services, home-based services that we provide for students on the autism spectrum, vision, hearing consultants, and that's driven by the IEP contracts that we have in place. We are reducing our special ed tuition and transportation costs. Typically, when we come to the advisory board, we ask you to allow us to hold a placeholder in our budget for special education outplacements and a corresponding placeholder for transportation. That allows the district to respond if students move into the district that weren't budgeted, that we have to immediately absorb the tuition costs for, or if we have a situation that emerges where we have to outplace a student. This year, we are not putting a placeholder in our budget. We aren't able to do that and keep the budget within the parameters of what the town can afford and support. So those reductions you can see there. Our transportation is up by $15,000. That is the 3rd year of our transportation contract with Holmes. We are asking for $250 more for our professional development to meet the requirements we have from the state for providing mandated training for our staff in conflict resolution, de-escalation, suicide prevention. These are all required trainings that we provide every year. Facilities maintenance, the cost of cleaning materials, we're anticipating to be up by $2,400. As you probably are dealing with on the town side right now, that's probably an underestimate given the amount of cleaning and sanitizing product that we've gone through in response to COVID-19. We're over budget in that. We'll hope to be able to manage that next year with the increase of $2,400, but again, that's probably conservative. So in the expense side, we have an overall net decrease of $48,182. Next slide will just show you the percentage of our budget increase by category. So 3.23% of our total budget increase is contractual, and that's the steps and lane changes, the COLA for non-union staff, and the cost of the bus transportation contract. 1.5% of that is driven by the new growth and enrollment that we're seeing in kindergarten. 0.09% of that is other, so that would be the assistant principal increase, and we have a total reduction of 0.42% in special education. This chart just gives you a sense of how our overall budget is spent. I have to look at my sheet because I can't see with your pictures. You'll see the largest portion of our pie goes to professional salaries for teaching staff. About 4% is for clerical salaries. 14% is other salaries, so that would be facilities, secretarial staff, food service workers. About 8% goes to services, and the majority of that is our transportation contract with Holmes. 3% of the budget funds curriculum materials and supplies, and 1% goes to other expenses, which can include sick leave buyback and other contractual obligations we have when teachers retire. Only 1% of our total budget goes to out-of-district tuitions, and that is significantly lower than most other districts in the area. Typically, the advisory board asks me about class size projections. So this gives you a sense of what we're expecting next year. Based on our current enrollment and our past trend data, we are expecting 160 students next year for kindergarten. As I said, we have over 150 already enrolled, and we typically pick up 10% between the time K enrollment ends in March and the time we open in September. Not all families register the students when it becomes available, and then we also have families that move into the district over the summer. So we're expecting 8 sessions of kindergarten next year with an average class size of 20. 7 first grades, we have 133 students currently enrolled. That would give us an average class size of 19. Again, at first grade, we often pick up about 8 to 10 students over the summer. Many families move into the district when their kids are young to start school. So that number could go up, but we base our projections on current enrollment for everything but kindergarten. Grade 2, we are expecting to have 7 sessions. That will be an increase of 1 classroom from this year. 128 students, average class size of 18.2. Grade 3 will have 6 sessions, 117 students, average class size of 19.5. Grade 4, we're expecting 7 sessions, 133 students, average class size of 19. Grade 5 also will have 7 sessions, total enrollment currently of 153 with class sizes of 21.9. And grade 6 will be reducing a teaching position, leaving us with 116 students and an average class size of 23.2. That will be one of the higher class sizes in the district. Again, using those same benchmark communities that we use for comparison purposes, you can see how our class sizes compare to other elementary districts. In 2016, our class sizes were among the highest. They've improved slightly in 17, 18, and 18 and 19 with an average class size of 20. So I wanted to highlight some of the efforts that we've made in terms of cost savings for the budget. We have shared for the past 4 years a facilities director with the town as well as a deputy director, which saves the district $40,000 annually in salary cost. We also have a shared HVAC maintenance support position that saves us annually $20,000. We have continued to look at ways to streamline services and share facilities, the operational budget. We have now added a shared custodial staff position. I know the town was able to eliminate the contracted services for cleaning by hiring a 0.5 custodian, and we have the other 0.5 of that position. We have also staggered the work week and the work schedule in order to have somebody that's working regularly on Saturdays and reduce overtime costs. So that saves us about $5,000. The HL of Day just turned 25 years old a couple of years ago. The furniture that we have in the HL of library is original to the building and was desperately in need of replacement. When we looked at pricing out replacement furniture, the cost was really high for those library tables and desks. So we, over the February vacation, our maintenance staff refinished all of those tables. They re-laminated the surfaces, and we saved about $7,500 on that. We are planning to convert the technology office and enclose that server space, as I mentioned earlier. We had some quotes to do that work. It would have come in about $25,000. We are going to do that in-house, and that should generate a savings of $12,000. We also, as I mentioned, have worked really collaboratively with King Philip, Rentham, and Plainville, and we have been cost sharing the mandated professional development that we have to provide, as well as other kinds of curriculum work, and we're saving about $20,000 annually in those shared services. Our tech team was able to renegotiate copier and printer contracts for next year, and that's also saving us about $20,000. And then by expanding that program that I talked about at Freeman Kennedy and building a receiving program for students in our Global Developmental Delay Program, we will save $230,000 next year in outplacements. And then also we've been working again with King Philip, Rentham, and Plainville to do some shared competitive grant writing. We were able to get a grant this year that is funding mental health staff for students. We have a full-time social worker. We have a wellness director for the region. The grant came in about $360,000 shared between all the districts, and the director of wellness has continued to write grants to bring in parent programming and other nutrition and health resources. So between all of the work we've done with that, we brought in about $155,000 of additional grant funding. That leaves a total savings of the budget next year of $500,000. One thing that I think is really important that we saw impact both the school budget as well as the town budget this year is the impact of charter school revenue. We have 2 local charter schools in the area. We have the Benjamin Franklin Classical Charter School in Franklin. Last year, they expanded their charter from serving 450 students to 750 students K-8. We also have the Foxborough Regional Charter School, and that serves 1,600 students from K to grade 12. Whenever we have a student in Norfolk that chooses to attend one of the charter schools, the state aid and money that we get for per pupil spending follows that child. So for every student that leaves to attend a charter school, we lose approximately $15,000 in funding. So it's really critical when we're looking at the budget, we're looking at our programs, that we maintain strong programs and remain competitive. If we lose 4 or 5 students to the charter school, that equates to a teacher position for us. And you know, if we cut programs that are critical, we could lose what we save in charter school tuition. We do have quite a few staffing needs and things that we don't have included in the budget at this point. And again, it's in recognition of the financial restraints that the town has. We would like that new position at Freeman Kennedy to be a full-time position. We're only asking for 0.6. We're going to shift some staffing around in order to create a full-time program. We would like the team chair position to be restored to a full-time position. We're only asking for 0.1 in this budget. As our programs grow and we have new additional classrooms, like I said, we have 2 extra classrooms next year at H. Olive Day School. We're going to need to consider increasing the art, music, and physical education staffing in order to provide those programs for all of our students. We're going to stretch it really tightly next year and should be able to get through next year, but this is going to be a challenge going forward. We would like the librarians to be back to full-time, which would be 0.2 for each building. We would also like to see our technology integration specialist who works at the H. Olive Day move from a 0.5 position to a full-time position. We have for a while talked about needing additional support for our developmental math program, and that's for students that are struggling to meet the grade level expectations to have additional support and help in math. We would like to restore the world language program. That's a 2 full-time teaching positions at minimum that we would need, about $128,000. Again, as I've mentioned in the past, the King Philip Regional is still not able to provide a foreign language program at grade 7. So we have delayed bringing this back because we know that that gap year, students are going to lose what they would have gained. So we have held on that and prioritized some other district programs. Custodial summer help is something that we really need to increase. We have limited staff during the summer and we have to thoroughly clean both buildings. And because of our partnership with the town, most of our buildings are used for a large portion of the summer. So the rec department uses a large area in the Freeman Kennedy, the gym, the fields, many classrooms, all the way through August. So it's difficult to turn the buildings around as quickly. We really need to consider increasing the staff that we have during the summer to manage that. And we would like to restore the .2 clerical positions for the Freeman Kennedy School and for the business office. We currently do not have any secretarial support in our payroll department or our HR department. And the Freeman Kennedy does not have, one of their staff members only works 0.6 in the main office at this point, which is a challenge for us. The total cost of things that we are not asking for at this point is about $384,000. On the expense side, there's a few things that we would also like to consider. We have a large number of paraprofessional staff that support our special education programs. We would like to be able to provide more curriculum development and content training for those staff members, but in order to do that, we would have to add an additional day to their contract. They currently only work 182 days. We have students 180 days. In order to have them stay on and participate in some of our professional development programming, it would be about $6,300. We would like to eliminate those band fees, as I mentioned earlier. That's $24,000. And technology replacement, we are not keeping up with our long-term technology replacement plan. We have a 5-year plan. We have an inventory of every piece of technology equipment and its expected useful life mapped out. In order to keep up with the recommended guidelines for equipment replacement, we would need an additional $125,000. We have staggered that. We're holding off on some classroom technology replacements next year. The total expense side items that we're not bringing forward is about $155,000. Last, I want to talk a little bit about the return on investment that the town sees. We do continue to demonstrate high standards of achievement for students. Norfolk performs in the top 18% on state MCAS tests. Our class sizes are now average. They used to be on the lower end, they're now average, although we do maintain a lower than average student-teacher ratio with our paraprofessional support and our developmental teachers. We continue to offer outstanding arts programs, music, visual arts, chorus, and an award-winning band program. Our students do have physical and health education twice a week. The majority of teachers in Norfolk have advanced degrees and more than 10 years of teaching experience, and we have a very low turnover of our teaching staff. And then lastly, we have clean, safe, and very well-maintained facilities with great outdoor learning and playground facilities. I know I'm running over my time, so I'm going to walk through the rest quickly. This is just a comparison of Norfolk's performance on the English Language Arts MCAS compared to the state. In 2015-16, the state did not report out data because they were piloting the Park Assessment and not every district took MCAS. So I don't have comparisons to the state for those years. 17, 18, and 19, you can see we continually significantly outperform the state on those exams. Same in math. We are even higher above the state on all of our math exams across all grade levels. It's an area of strength for our students, and they do very well. This, because of the way I'm sharing this, if you go on our website, there's a brief video where the students will tell you what the return on investment is of their education in Norfolk. So if you want to see that, you can go to our webpage, but I can't make it live in this presentation. And now, Medora, Paul, and I are happy to take any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I am looking for hands being raised. I think, oh wow, I guess the presentation was pretty complete. I don't see more. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to start with the advisory committee members first after we've had a round to go through and answer our questions that we'll open up to the public. So Brian, you are first. Please unmute and go ahead.
So my question is around as you move the assistant principal positions up to full-time, you said currently that they're half-time as curriculum directors. Where is that curriculum direction going to fall once they're full-time assistant principals?
So what we'd like to do is and this is changing a little bit because one of our assistant principals has accepted a position elsewhere, so the staffing is changing. But what we would like to do is hire a full-time assistant so that they will retain their 0.5 curriculum role, and when they're working on the curriculum and coaching teachers and facilitating curriculum meetings, the assistant principal the new person we would hire would cover. So they would be 0.5 at each Olive Day, 0.5 at Freeman Kennedy, which would allow the current staff members to complete their curriculum work and be off-site to, again, coach teachers, visit classrooms, develop curriculum and assessment materials, and fulfill the responsibility of that role.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Kristen, question.
Hi. I was curious about the loss of a teacher in grade 6, and then there were additions to kindergarten and I think grade 5. Is the loss of the teacher in grade 6 just shifting to another classroom, or is it an actual person leaving?
No, we aren't anticipating any layoffs. What we do in terms of our staffing every year is we look at enrollment, and teachers are shifted from one grade to another to meet the needs of that class. So the 6th grade position will be moved to 2nd grade to accommodate that increased enrollment there.
Okay,
So
and then when those class moves up, they may move back.
that's right.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, any other advisory committee questions? Okay, having seen none, I will open it up to the public. Mr. Hadid, if you could please introduce your name and your address and ask your question. You are muted still there, Ed.
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ed Headed, 138 Red Maple Run. Sorry. Thank you, Dr. Alani, for that presentation. I just have two quick questions. I just want to follow up on Brian's question. You said there was a new position that you would like to have if you made those assistant principals full-time. Is that full-time position in the budget now, or is that something you plan to put in?
That is in the budget now. It's something that we've really needed for probably 7 years, and we have cut it every year in order to accommodate. We've had such a growth in enrollment, we've had to put that to a teaching position. So it's in the budget proposal. It is not something that is in this year's budget.
Okay, so it's a want. It's not in the numbers. I just wanted to clarify because I didn't see it on there. That's why I was just looking.
It is in the budget proposal for this year. It's the 95,000 when you look at the salary increases on that slide.
That's for the assistant principals.
Yeah.
No, I said, but what Brian asked you was the positions that have positions that they're covering now. How would you fill that? And you talked about adding another full-time person to backfill those. Where is that position?
That is the assistant principal position I'm posing will be the person that backfills those roles so that the current can complete their curriculum work.
Okay, sorry, I understand
No,
that.
that's
Thank
okay.
you. Yep. And then the second question is in light of what the world is going through right now, and certainly the uncertainty of the financial situations, do you have a backup plan developed, at least in your own mind, as to if fundings in the town and the state didn't work out the way they would be? Do you have a plan for what you would do to
We do.
or to react to that?
We do. And at this point, I think it's early. None of us really has a sense of what's going to happen with the economy. But when we were first asked to present the budget to you, we were asked to present what a 0% budget increase would look like. And we took that exercise very seriously, worked hard with our administrative team. And that proposal showed where our reductions would come if we had to make them. So we would follow the plan of what we presented to the select board back in October.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't asking to know what they were. I was just thinking, have you thought about that and developed something in your own mind?
Yep, we do have a thoughtful plan. It would be, I mean, obviously it would have an impact on our students, but we have thought that through.
Thank you. I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other questions from folks online, actually, Brian, go ahead.
I just wanted to make sure I heard that right, though. You were turning what is currently a server room into a classroom because of expansion problems within H. Olive Day?
Yes, so we're currently at capacity right now. Next year, we need an additional kindergarten classroom and we need an additional second grade. We don't have any open classrooms. We have a server room that what used to be a instructional space. It was a classroom. It right now is serving as the technology office and server room. By enclosing that server, building walls around it, ventilating it, and putting air conditioning in, we get half of the classroom back, which could be used for small group instruction and some other kinds of resources in office space, which would hopefully, we'll end up moving someone in there and trying to free up a classroom space in doing that. But we are out of space.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have another question from Mr. Hadid. Go ahead, Ed.
Sorry, I just looked at, Dr. Leddy, when I was looking at the technology thing that you spoke about, the 125,000, I personally think technology for the kids is very important. Now, and you talk about it as an expense item. Isn't that something that might go through the free cash as a capital expenditure, like at fall meeting or something? Isn't that usually how it's done?
District has budgeted for our technology replacement. It is something we're going to hit a point because the Freeman Kennedy was built in, all of the technology was purchased at the same time and it's aging up on 10 years. So we're going to hit a time where we need to replace enough technology that it would meet the threshold for a capital project. I know the town has a huge number of capital needs right now, so we've decided to delay next year and not bring forward an additional ask for replacement. But that would be an avenue that we could consider a year from now.
Thank you.
Okay, yes, David, please go ahead with your question.
Just wanted to follow on what the superintendent said, is that in small bites, technology is not a capital expense. I think she indicated that if there was an opening for a large expenditure for technology upgrades, that would happen. But in small bites, it's not a capital expense at all. Did everyone hear that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
We're all on mute.
Everyone's so orderly. It's greatly appreciated. Okay, I don't see any other hands up. So, and I know we've gone about 15, almost 20 minutes over. Apologies for that, but these schools are a very large and very important part of our budget. So I want to make sure that we have the time that we need to understand it.
I don't know if either of my committee members had anything they wanted to add. Usually they're up with me, but we're in a remote platform, so I can't see either of them.
Pardon me?
Nothing to add from Paul.
Nothing to add from me. As always, tremendously thorough. I'm in awe of Ingrid's attention to detail, so I'm just here for the show.
Very good. So with that, we will conclude that portion. Thank you for everyone from Norfolk Schools there. And we will now transition, I believe, with respect to King Philip. Larry, is it Azar? Am I pronouncing your name correctly, Larry?
So after you have Larry Azer as the business manager, and I'm on as well. This is Paul Zinni, superintendent of schools.
Oh, you are here, Paul. Okay,
Yes,
good.
you got us both. It's the Paul and Larry show. We've done it about 8 times now, and we're preparing to do one more version of that for all of you this evening. But Larry's got the PowerPoint on his computer, so that's why I wanted to make sure that you had his information there so that he could show you his screen, and then we'll be taking turns walking you through the presentation.
Excellent. So please proceed.
Alrighty, so it looks like Larry has been able to show you his screen. Hopefully everyone is seeing the new PowerPoint presentation. And so we certainly want to actually start off by thanking the Norfolk schools, because as I've said before, the education process is not one section or another. It's pre-K through 12 with a culmination of a diploma. And if you're building a house, you don't stop at the foundation, and you don't just build the walls and a roof without having all the other pieces together. And we're very fortunate that Norfolk does an excellent job of preparing its students so that when they move forward to King Philip, we can take them the rest of the way on their journey. And so tonight, we'd like to share with you the journey of the King Philip schools and what we will be doing with the students once they leave the Norfolk piece of this and head over to us at King Philip Middle School and High School. So we'll take you through our accomplishments. We'll show you about enrollment. We'll show you about data comparisons, where our revenue is coming from, what our expenses are, and ultimately, I thought I saw out there.
Yes, actually, if we could just pause for a second, we have a question from David. Yes, David, go ahead.
I see there's 123 slides, and I'm wondering if there's a way we can blow through a few of these. I'm deadly serious about that.
No, we
So
will.
no reason to have a 123 slide presentation. I apologize.
So let me just begin by saying that there are two reasons now. Number one, the slide presentation itself will end before the 123rd mark. Your last 20 or so slides are supporting documents that you all had in your packet, and they're not actually slides any longer. But if you got the PowerPoint in advance, and we sent it to you in advance, so hopefully you're holding it, you know that the end of that packet are just some supporting documents. The reason why the presentation is as long as it is because we found in the last few years when presenting to the 3 different towns that we get lots of questions on certain areas. And so Larry has been incredibly thorough by including some charts and graphs to support those. And we will be moving through those very quickly, but they're there in case you stop us at that point for clarification on things like enrollment or how the assessments are calculated or things like that. We have the additional slides that will act as visuals to help you to understand that.
So that sounds good to me, although why don't we, after we finish with data comparisons, number 4, why don't we just pause for a second and just check where everyone's at? How does that sound?
That's fine with us. We had certain breaking points that we're going to suggest actually stop and say, do you have any questions on this section?
Wonderful.
But however you'd like to do that.
No, that's fine. If you want to pause between sections, that's great. We could read a temperature for where folks are at. Thank you.
Sure.
And
And
actually,
as I
before
said, we are going to try to move through the presentation fairly quickly because this is probably the 7th or 8th time seriously that Larry and I have done it. And we start to bore each other here. So
I appreciate your focus and your brevity. One more quick question here from Susan Klein on the board. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, again, I think we had a heads up last week that the presentation was really long, and I believe that the board briefly discussed trying to limit the number of slides going forward. I realized this presentation was already done, but I wanted to make sure that that's something that we made you aware that we were going to be discussing. Most of that is because if people want the whole full entire presentation, you've given it, like you said, 8 times, they can find it somewhere else. This is more for you to discuss the budget, the actual numbers, and less about the other stuff. So I just wanted to let you know that that was something we were going to be considering, is limiting the number of slides going forward.
We would absolutely welcome that.
To make it smaller. Just because.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you very much. We would absolutely welcome that. This got this long because of the questions that we've been asked to respond to in the last few years. And so we are very happy to move this along. As a matter of fact, we have a much more brief one that we had debated about giving you, but unfortunately, we didn't realize your goal to make it brief and pithy. So we gave you the long form rather than the short form. But we'll turn the long into short.
Thank you. I appreciate you doing a little improvisation here for us.
Exactly. And actually, the first section is really around accomplishments. And if you've all got the packet, I hope that you took a little bit of time to read through the accomplishments. The number of students who are graduating with distinction in our district, the number of staff members who have been honored with the work that they've done. And I want to move us just briefly to point out that to move to our scores, our test scores, because I do think it's important before we move into the budget, as Dr. Lottie did, to highlight some of the excellence, education that's going on at King Philip and why the funding that you provided to us in the past has not gone to waste. Our students are performing tremendously well. One of the many indicators that we use at the secondary level, of course, is the MCAS. And you know that the students are tested both in 7th and 8th grade at our middle school and again at the high school. And as you can see by the chart that's on the screen, in every single subject at every grade level, our students are dramatically outperforming the state. And I want to just take a moment to kind of highlight that just a little bit further and to tell you that nationally, the United States gives an assessment every 2 years called the NAEP, the National Assessment of Education Progress. For the last 20 years, Massachusetts has been outperforming the country. You also hear about how the country is performing in regards to the world. There are certain assessments like the PISA and the TIMSS that are given internationally, and you hear that our country is falling further behind. The last few times that the test has been given, Massachusetts has paid to have its scores disaggregated to look at how Massachusetts is doing if it were its own country. And in each of those cases, Massachusetts scored within the top 5 for math and science and literacy. If you take that information and recognize that Massachusetts is outperforming the country and outperforming the world, and you look at how significantly King Philip is outperforming the state, you truly can be proud that your students are receiving a world-class education. And you have 6 or 7 slides within your packet that outline all the many ways that that's the case. But I think it was important to at least say that much before we moved on to talk about the budget. And I will also point out that, again, in our AP scores, our students are outperforming the state dramatically. SAT scores, same thing. With that, I would prompt you all to pay attention to the way that we push out news. We're doing our very best to tell the good news stories, and we have a news blog on our website. We have a Twitter account, and we have a Facebook page that are all populated with all of those good news stories all the time. And so if you're not following us on a regular basis, we ask you to pick your favorite method of being informed and to start to get that information. With that, if there are no questions regarding our performance, we'll move right into the enrollment stage.
Thanks, Paul. So we'll review our enrollment. You can see here the breakdown by grade and by the towns. We don't, because of the nature of how middle schools and high school works, we don't have class sizes per se, but most of our sections are in the mid-20s to upper 20s, and there are a number of sections that are in the low 30s. So that's something we always keep an eye on. The percentages on the bottom, I'll just call your attention to, because those will come back later when we start calculating the assessments for the costs that are above the minimum requirement from the state. So showing here on the enrollment, you can see our enrollment has taken a little bit of a dip the last couple of years, and we project it to continue that way. The reason why is because the elementary enrollment has been dropping in the aggregate, and not for Norfolk, obviously, as you folks know. Norfolk is the red line here, and Norfolk this year actually has more elementary students than Rentham for the first time in at least a long time. But as Norfolk is going up, Rentham is going down. Plainville is staying about flat. So what's happened is the total enrollment for the enrollment has been pretty flat lately. However, going back a number of years, there was a big drop in the elementary, and those kids are now going to be in KP in the coming years. So that's why we were projecting a little bit of a drop there. Nothing huge, maybe less than 100 students, but nonetheless a decline. So same as Ingrid did, we'll also do some comparison groups. We compare ourselves to, on the left-hand side, the other schools in the Hockomock League that are our neighbors. And on the right-hand side, so as you know, obviously KP is only a middle school and a high school. So there are only 11 other districts in the state that have only a middle school and a high school that are listed here for you. KP is the largest of all them. A lot of these are in central and western Mass. And the thing I'll call it to is that all of these other districts have what's called a superintendent's union, so that even though their middle school and high school are separate entities from the feeder elementary districts, they have one central office, one superintendent, one business office, and so on. So they're able to gain some efficiencies through that organization. So comparing ourselves to some of those other districts, KP is in the green. We're in the lower third of spending per pupil versus the other schools in our league, and we're 12% below the state average. And compared to those middle high school regions, we're the lowest amongst all those districts. Which, and when you consider that KP is carrying the full cost of a central office, whereas the others are sharing it, I think is even more impressive. One of the things I want to call it is Chapter 78 per student, and let me preface all these things by saying this was put together before the current economic crash. We're waiting on the state budget to see what kind of impact it has, both on school aid as well as, I'm sure you folks are waiting on what the impact to the town aid is. But Chapter 78 is the education aid from the state. And if you look at the ratio of that per student, you'll see back going 10 years, KP in the green line here was close to a number of the other cohorts. And now in the current day, KP is trailing by a significant margin against any other comparison group. So we're receiving less money from the state than other groups, other schools and other towns are. And obviously every dollar we don't get from the state is another dollar that shifts to the towns. So we try to be cognizant of that. If you look at net school spending, again, the other metric, again, going back to the left side of this slide, KP was in the middle of the pack, and now KP is at the bottom. KP has had the largest decrease amongst all the comparison groups. Look at it versus requirement. KP again is the lowest amongst all the comparison groups.
Larry, can I jump in for a second? This is RJ.
Yep, sure.
Is there any way you can make the screen a little bit larger? Folks
Larger.
are asking to try to see the numbers a bit better. Now, people can go to the URL that I sent out earlier to download this. I don't know if there's a Zoom.
I'm
I
not
guess you
sure
can
how
zoom
to
in
do
sections. But, okay. If it's not obvious, then go ahead and continue.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I think like others, I'm kind of new at this thing, so
That's okay. Thanks for looking.
sorry.
Larry, top it says display settings.
Display settings.
Above, I don't know if it in there, or we'll give you.
Now this just says swap presenter.
Sorry, one more attempt.
Yeah, sorry, folks.
Again, people can download the slide deck off of the
Yeah,
meeting.
hopefully people have it that they can review it, and the numbers will get bigger as we go. So I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
And they're also on the KP website as well.
Yeah. The important thing here is to see that KP is spending only about 15% above the requirement. The state average is spending about 26% above average. The other comparison groups are spending 30% and much more. So what that translates to is, so KP is spending 15.6% above requirement. If KP was spending, sorry about that. If KP was spending at these, the levels of these other comparison groups, our budget would be anywhere from 1.1 million higher to 5.8 million higher. So you can see, we're spending far less than our neighbors are. So any questions on that before we move into the revenue?
Any questions, anybody? David, your hand is still up. Did you want to ask something, or is that from before?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Before Larry moves into revenue, I just want to point out one thing. We talked to you earlier about how well our district was performing, and if we had looked at those slides more carefully, you would have seen comparisons between us in some of those same groups that Larry was showing you comparisons with now, and those may come up again later. But you can see that our district is well outperforming the state, and yet we're spending significantly less than the state per pupil-wise to educate our students. So fiscally responsible in that regard. And with that said, I'll let Larry move into the revenue piece of it, because that's where you really want to be paying attention, we know.
So looking at the revenue, like I said before, the state aid makes up about 25% of our revenue. We have small amounts coming from the E&D, which is essentially our version of free cash, and the rest of it comes from the member towns. So again, we try to be sensitive to any fluctuations in the budget, knowing that the towns are making up the vast majority of our revenue. So looking at the state aid projection, the state passed a landmark bill. Again, we'll have to see what the economy does to that, but prior to that, it was a huge influx of funding that was put into public education. However, about 85% of that money is going to only 35 districts in the state, mostly large urban districts. So KP is only getting the minimum of $30 per student, which is a 1.1% increase in our state aid. We do have a small increase in transportation and charter reimbursement, but the net increase in state aid is only 1.65%. And if you do the math, that obviously doesn't help us keep up. Transportation reimbursements have been underfunded for the last 10 years by several $100,000 a year. So that's funding that we should be getting, but we're not. The district revenue, we bring in a small amount of money largely from Medicaid reimbursements. For students who have Medicaid insurance, we can bill their insurance for certain services that we provide to them. Here's our E&D, again, which is our equivalent of your free cash. Our current balance is $952,000, which is about 2.8% of our total budget. State allows districts to have no more than 5%. So we're about half of that amount. So it's a fairly good place to be. And you can see what we're using for the operating budget. The last year and this year, we have put $400,000 of that towards the budget. So a little less than half. And that's the same as what we're putting in next year. So right off the bat, our E&D will be down to $550,000. So probably about 1% of our total budget. So wrapping it up on the revenue projection, what we started off with in the fall is a sort of a target of the total budget going up 3%. That's what we tried to have as a target the last couple of years. When you factor in that the state aid is only going up 1.65%, however, that means that the operating assessments to the towns would need to go up 3.5% in order to get us to a 3% overall budget increase. So that was our initial target where we started our work. And then we'll talk about where we went into calculating our expenses. So we just want to remind you real quick, for those who weren't around a couple of years ago, this is before Paul and I got here, the chaos of the FY18 budget. So 3 years ago, there was a huge increase in the KP budget and a lot of cuts were made. So the folks back then made a lot of one-time use of reserve funds from special education and E&D. If you saw from the chart, some other one-time savings, the health insurance plans were redesigned. And so they had one-time savings of well over $1 million. There were a number of reductions to staffing and services. You can see some of them we've been able to restore over the last couple of years. The three in the middle that say unbudgeted FY21, we'll talk about in a minute. And then the rest of them haven't been restored yet, some of which don't need to be due to changes in how we operate. But we still have a number of items that were cut 3 years ago that have still not been restored. So looking at our employee totals, right now we have less employees than we had in 2016, 17, and 18. We did add a couple this year, but we're still less than we were in the years prior to that. So when we prepare our budgets, we ask our principals and department heads, we give them this motto from Wayne Gretzky, the second greatest hockey player of all time, that you miss 100% of the shots you never take. And so we give that directive to folks who are preparing their budget, and it essentially means if you don't ask for something, you're never going to get it. Now, just because you ask for it, it doesn't mean you will get it. However, we feel we have an obligation to let our school committee and let folks like you know, and the citizens in general, know what the needs of the district are. And similar to Dr. Alardi.
Make the request.
What's that?
I'm sorry, what was that, David?
Nope.
I didn't catch that.
Okay.
Make the request.
That's what we're going to talk about. Thank you. So we tell our folks to ask for it, and similar to what Dr. Alardi said, there were a number of items that she's tried to put in her budget over the last number of years. We're starting to accumulate those requests and prioritize them, and hopefully when funds become available, we will be able to add them. So I'll let Paul talk about some of those needs that, things that we need, but are not in the budget that we're proposing to you.
So I want to point out before I even move forward with this comment or this explanation that the budget that we are presenting to you is a level service budget. There are a number of things that we should be putting into this budget to move our district forward, things that are crucial for our students learning in the future. We recognize that technology is something that our students need to be working on, world languages. There are a number of things that we really need to be building into the budget to maximize learning for our students, but recognize that this is not necessarily the time for our 3 districts to be able to support that. And so the presentation that we've given you, the budget that the school committee has voted is a level service one. But we think it's imperative for you to know what is not in that budget so that when we continue to bring it back forward, you understand that these are not things that are new. These are things that we've needed for a while, but have respectfully not built in because of our understanding of where everyone is in the process. So the engineering teacher was cut in 2018. That position would be slightly remodeled to be an engineering and technology teacher, allowing us to offer AP computer science classes. Again, not in the budget. Looking at world languages middle school, I heard Dr. Alati make reference to the fact that they can't build world languages back at the elementary because we have no 7th grade world language coming into the middle school. That would be put there. Dr. Alati mentioned the wellness coordinator, the grant that we worked on together, the 3 elementaries and King Philip, to bring in the wellness program, and the director as part of that. We would have liked to have put a quarter at least of the salaries in to cover those costs in case the grant's not available next year. But again, recognize that that's not something that we can fund. The curriculum frameworks for history, social studies changed in the last year. It means that the courses that we once taught at certain grades are no longer, those topics are no longer taught in those grades. New topics have been added, some have been taken away, and the whole idea of teaching civics has been added to the curriculum. Our textbooks are no longer aligned with the curriculum frameworks, and we have no textbooks for civics. To align the social studies or history, language, history curriculum, we would need to realign that grade 7 through 12, and the materials that we would need would cost us almost $163,000. Our teachers desperately need those materials, but again, we have not built those into the budget. We will continue to make do for the next year and hope that at some point we can piecemeal that together and at least get the civics books and eventually bring us up to speed over the next couple of years. Again, there are a number of other factors there. I'm not going to go through them all because I'm definitely hearing that you'd like us to move through this presentation quickly. You can read that there are a number of other issues that we feel are important to fund that, again, have not been built into the budget.
So can I ask, is the screen bigger for you guys now?
Yes, thank you. Yes, that's definitely helpful. I appreciate that.
I figured it out. Only took me 3 weeks. Okay, now can I get to the next slide? That'll be good. Okay. Yep. All right. So one of the things that was on our list of things that we'd like to do or actually continue to do is reduce the user fees. The fees were increased 3 years ago in that budget struggle. We were fortunate we were able to reduce them this year to what they had been prior to that. And we have a long-term plan to eventually roll them down to 0. So we put that initially in next year's budget, but again, trying to be fiscally prudent, we took that out. It was about would take about $150,000 to reduce them further. As you can see here, KP has by far the largest. This is sports, but also for music, we have the largest, the highest user fees in the region. And that just puts an additional burden on our families. So summing up the items that were requested but not included, it's about $843,000. So as Paul said, we are presenting a level service budget, which is basically take everything we have now and increase it for inflation and contractual obligations. That's what we have done here. You can see on our expense budget, our instruction takes up about 62% of the budget. On the far right-hand side of Ben Franklin, you see insurance takes up over 16%. And that's a part of the budget that's unique to regions because as our own municipal entity, we have to budget for health insurance and retirement costs and other types of insurance like liability and workers' comp and unemployment. And then in the middle, we're spending small slivers on technology, facilities, and transportation. So I'm going to flip it back to Paul for a minute here.
Sure. One of the areas that we know has been of concern over the last few years regarding the budget are the costs regarding special education. In 1975, federal law guaranteed to anyone with a disability certain rights. Students with disabilities were guaranteed a free, appropriate public education that meant at the cost to the school districts in the least restrictive environment. Because King Philip did not necessarily have the programs that could support students, those students were then the best way to educate them at that point was to then provide them with an education in a private setting, in a program that was outside of the public schools. Those programs required tuition costs. We have been able over the last 2 years to begin building programs internally, which have allowed us to keep students in the district that would have been referred out, and in some cases to actually take students back from those out of district programs and bring them back to the district. Over the course of between last year and the end of next year, we will have saved 34%, or our special ed costs would have gone down by 34% over that 2-year span of time. In this year's budget, the savings would be almost $800,000. But to keep those students in and not have them go out, we need to build the programs internally. There is a cost factor involved with that. It's a cost avoidance, and that's why we consider it part of level service. That would require us to add some teaching staff within the special education realm. But even after adding that staff, we still come out almost $300,000 ahead. That money is then used to support other aspects of the budget so that we don't have to come forward and ask for so much to the towns for a level service budget. Okay, Larry.
So again, as Paul said, we're presenting a level service budget, and it's an increase of 3.49% to our overall budget. So our instruction budget is going up only 2.28%, and that's includes the tuition savings that Paul mentioned and those additional positions that are coming in the offset. With all that, it's still only a 2.28% increase. So our out-of-district tuition, as Paul said, is going down 19.5% next year. And as Paul said, between last year, this year, and going to next year, it's a 34% reduction in the special education tuition. So it's back to where it had been in prior years, and we're continuing to work that down. Our technology budget is going up only 0.5%. And even with that, we've been able to upgrade and add a lot of technology and devices to our staff and students. Currently, right now, we're at a ratio of about 2 students for every device. So they share them on laptop carts for the most part. And that's has worked out pretty well so far from the staff. On transportation, the increase is also less than 0.5%. We're currently in, next year will be the 3rd year, the final year of our big bus contract. And so we'll be going out to bid on that. The special education transportation has gone down to in alignment with the tuitions going down. And you can see the trends on those. Our facilities budget is going up 7.86%. Part of that is due to utilities because the fluctuating nature of utility budgeting is difficult to do. However, even with the increase for next year, what we've proposed for next year, you'll see it's still less than we spent last year. So even though it is an increase, it's not a it's not a long-term increase trend. The other areas that are showing increase are buildings and our equipment. Similar to what you heard Dr. Lardy say about the age of the buildings and the equipment, the KP renovations are now 12 to 15 years old in both buildings. So a lot of the equipment has exceeded its warranty, and in some cases nearing the end of its useful life. A lot of these expenses, in particular things like HVAC units, so unit vents in the classrooms, rooftop exhaust fans that keep the air circulating. We've had boiler issues at the middle school in particular this year. And I can tell you that thankfully we had a very mild winter, because if we had a winter like we had in some past years, with the condition of our middle school boilers, we may have had to close school on some days because we just simply wouldn't have been able to get the heat to a acceptable temperature. So we've been spending a lot of the time this year fixing those boilers, and we're right now in the process of getting price quotes to replace at least one of them over the summer, so we don't have an issue next year. Skip those. Next, we have our insurance and benefits. Like I said, this is something that is only in a regional budget. So if you saw our presentation back in January, you saw that we had put a placeholder in of a 12% increase to our health insurance premiums. And that was because, as I'll show you in a minute, our claims were getting really high and heading in an upward trend. However, they've started to come back down lately, so we're pleased that we got a final increase of only 5%. And that comes on the heels of last year was a 3% increase, the year before that 2.6% increase. So a little more than 10% over 3 years on the premiums is, I think, pretty good. And the other part of the increase is we've had some additional employees take on the insurance. It's not necessarily that we have more employees than we had before. It's just that more of them are opting to take the insurance, and obviously we have to offer it. And so if they take it, they take it. So I was talking about why did we initially put a 12% increase in there. So this is a 2-year look at our claims history of all our employees and their dependents that are on the plans. So you can see there's a very strong trend heading upwards. And the red line is how much we were paying in premiums. So essentially where the blue line is above the red line means that the insurance company was losing money on us. So we met in the fall, and they said, looking at these trends, said, well, we would estimate probably 10 to 15% of an increase, which, while high, is, if you're familiar with the insurance industry, I'm sure you've seen, individual year increases do that. This is why. However, as you can see, the last 6 months since then, the claims have started heading down back into a positive trend. So the insurance company was comfortable enough to finalize only a 5% increase. So we're very pleased about that. It's just more data on that. And lastly, the debt service. This is just the cost of paying off the borrowing for the renovations. And as with most debt service items, those are going to go down as time goes on because the interest payments go down. So we'll get into the assessment calculations. As if you know, we use the state method, which relies on the required local contribution as a starting point. And that number comes from the state as part of the governor's budget in January. And then anything above it is allocated based on each town's share of the enrollment, which I had mentioned several slides ago. Talked about that. So some of the factors that influence that in particular are the wealth factors that are unique to each town, and the municipal revenue growth factor, which essentially tries to estimate the town's ability in how much they can spend on education. So I'll go through these real quick just so you can understand why the assessments came out the way they did. So the foundation enrollment, you can see here Norfolk and Plainville both went down. Rentham had an increase. On the revenue growth factors, Norfolk and Plainville had a decrease, Rentham had an increase. On the local contributions, Norfolk and Plainville had a decrease, Rentham had an increase. And the enrollment in our district, Norfolk and Plainville had decreases and Rentham had an increase. So if you follow that trend, you'll see that every major factor went down for Norfolk and Plainville, which reduces cost, and everything went up for Rentham, which increases cost. So I won't go through every step here, but you'll see the down here on the bottom, row 18, the bottom of this chart, the Norfolk assessment is increasing by 1.46% from this year to next year. Plainville's a little higher, and Rentham you can see is much higher, and that's again largely due to those factors that I just went through. If you look at our 5-year look, you'll see here that Norfolk, well, our total budget has gone up an average of 3.83%. This year went up only 3%. The year before, 2.88. Next year, 3.49. Norfolk has had, you know, some years have been higher, some years have been lower. Same thing with the other towns. Because we're using that state formula, it's subject to those variables that we just went through quickly. And you can see why there's those increases. So in all, this is the what the school committee adopted, a budget of $36.5 million with those town assessments. And we're done.
Okay, I appreciate you skimming through that as quickly as you did. Questions from the committee, we'll start with that. Any questions about the budget figures, the trade-offs? Looking for any hands that are up. David, yes, go ahead.
Unmuted. Oh, shoot. Hold
Yes,
on.
you're unmuted.
I am? Okay. So a broader question at the end of the presentation. And this is the problem with this technology, is that I cannot access my own slides while it's up. And I said this last meeting, but shoot, I forgot what I was drilling down on something in the middle of the presentation. I apologize. Arthur, let me back off for a bit.
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Go ahead and collect your thoughts there. Other questions that people have?
I just want to say I'm able to go to my screen and open up the power. Like I can open it up on a different screen. I just had to escape out of the full screen, and I was able to see what was sent to us ahead of time and see what you were pointing to on the screen. So I think that's a setting, David, that you can adjust, because I am able to see everything I need to see.
Yeah, minimizing your Zoom screen allows you to access your other tabs.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions prepared from the advisory committee before I go to Brian? Yes, please go ahead.
I think my one question goes to the superintendent union. You mentioned we're the only ones, and I know this was a topic we had talked about before, but I'm not sure we've ever tied it to the budget discussion. Would there be overall savings to the towns if there were a superintendent union versus the way it's worked now?
There would be some savings in the sense that, so on the one hand, you wouldn't have 4 superintendents, but because of the size of the district, you'd have a district that would be almost 5,000 students spread across 8 schools in 3 towns. So you would probably need an assistant superintendent or 2 or some curriculum directors, because now you'd be a K-12. You might need some, you know, so you would, instead of being broad and flatter, you would be a little narrower, but you would need some, for lack of a better term, some middle management to help with that. Because you're going to have, you know, again, 8 different schools, you're going to have to coordinate that. So overall, there'll probably be a little bit of savings, but it's not going to be a big pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. but it does, more importantly, it creates, and like Paul said, and Ingrid said in her presentation, you know, there has been a lot more of collaboration and coordination and cost sharing on some things like professional development and wellness. So this would allow for just to continue that even further. So I think that would be the big benefit of doing that. And you know, the cost would, you know, be a little bit. So hope that
Thank
answers
you.
the question.
Okay, any other advisory committee questions? Going once, going twice. Okay, open up to the public. Mr. Hadid, you had a question, please go ahead.
I have two questions, actually. The first question, since I see that it's an important factor to you, how do you replenish your E&D fund? How does that get replenished since you're not a town in yourself? How does that get built up again?
In the same ways that towns' free cash gets replenished, there are two ways. Either you don't spend all of your expense budget and or you your revenues exceed what you initially projected. So in some cases for us, it's been a combination of both.
So in effect, whatever the assessments that Norfolk pays to you, we don't get a refund on it. It just then would go into your fund.
Right, but as we saw,
Okay.
the last couple of years, we've been putting almost half of that balance back into the budget for the following year. So it reduces the assessment the following year.
Right, okay, I knew that's important to you. That's why I just didn't understand how that worked. I was just clarifying how it worked.
Yep.
Thank you. And the second question on your page 66, where you talked about the special ed program that you brought in-house and the savings, and it would cost you about $500,000 in salaries to offset the almost $800,000 that you're saving. Does that include overhead costs, you know, or is that just pure salary?
Well, overhead costs in as much as materials and such, but primarily salary at that particular point. Remember,
No,
we had.
Excuse me, when I say overhead, I mean benefits and taxes and that type of stuff, things that you throw onto salaries normally.
Yeah, those are accounted for in the insurance budget.
And then, so they're not in the 500,000 though.
Correct. The 500,000 is all salary.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to be clear of what I was looking at. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All set. Thank you.
Alfred, I think your mic is off. Arthur, I'm sorry.
Sorry, thank you, yes. Good catch. I have too many windows open. Susan, you had a question, please go ahead.
Yes, we receive a lot of questions, not just with school committee, not just with school budgets, but in town meeting and in town budget presentations, DPW budgets, all of the above, about free cash. I was wondering if there is a way to explain to everybody that free cash or E&D is basically like a savings account, and you save for when there's going to be something to come up during the school year that you couldn't during the budgeted year, when you can't just access new money from the town, that you have to pay for something. Like, for example, Mr. Zinni, if you're not asking us to replace the boiler right now, what are you going to do? Obviously, you don't have ESP. So what are you going to do if this coming winter is a bad winter? You just said that if last winter had been as bad, had it been a bad winter, you wouldn't have been able to hold school. I would think that after being out of school for 2 months this year, we don't want to miss school for any reason next year. Are you going to replace the boiler by using your E&D funds? Which, you know, I would like to make sure that everyone knows that's what it's there for. It's just like if you save in your own personal life, you save in case your tires go out. It's part of your budget to save money every month or every year. Is that what you're going to do if the boiler goes out? Because I'm just not understanding the rationale for, if you know it's going to fail, if we have a bad winter, why we're not asking to replace it.
Right.
No, we are. I did say that. I'm sorry if I went quickly on that. We are planning on replacing that this winter, this summer rather.
Okay.
We did the repairs just to get through the winter, but we're in the process of getting pricing to do that work this summer. So we
Okay,
are-
I apologize. I thought when you were explaining it, you were saying that it needed to be done, but it was one of the things you weren't asking for yet.
Oh,
We actually
yeah,
have 3 boilers at the middle school.
Right.
And 2 of them were not working properly. 1 was. So we were trying to heat the building with only 1 boiler rather than 3. And because it was a milder winter, it was easier to do that. Had it been a bad winter, it would have pushed us to replace the boiler rather than trying to put the duct tape and chewing gum to try to hold off the repairs a little bit longer.
Right. And I I get that you are having to sorry, I don't know if that's my internet or not. I get that you are having to sort of play triage. That's, the nature of your job is what can we get by with and what can we not get by with. I would think that student materials and teacher materials such as textbooks that are up to date and a boiler so that our children aren't freezing are probably pretty important things. And I know that one of the letters that we have received that we were forwarded, or a request of the advisory board, was to please not approve a 3% budget increase. I'm just not sure I see any way around that. I mean, as much as everybody would like to save money right now, you can't send, sorry, correct me, did you say 2,000 is our enrollment? 2,100 is our, you can't send 2,100 kids to school without heat.
Right.
I mean, those things just need to be done. And I'm wondering what the rationale is for not updating textbooks at this time.
Because we were already at a 3.49 with a level service, and adding another $162,000 would have pushed us to almost a 4% overall ask to the communities. We know that each community has its own struggles, and also looking at the way the assessment fell this year, Rentham is getting hit with almost an 8% increase on their assessment, which even when you budget for a really bad year, no community would have budgeted in advance for that type of increase. And so we're trying to recognize and balance providing a quality education to our students and trying to also be respectful to the communities at the same time. I think what we had initially hoped was that as the year comes to an end, when you have a little bit of money in some of your supply lines that we haven't quite spent out, that we could begin to purchase those textbooks. That's normally the case. You're able to do a little bit of buy ahead from one year to the next. All districts do that. I'm hopeful, or keeping my fingers crossed, that might be possible this year for some of that. But with the issues that we've had around closing school, having to, overtime for our custodians to do a deep clean, I'm not sure that will be the case. But when we built this budget 3 months ago, we were hopeful that maybe we would be able to chip away at those textbooks, getting the most significant needs, like the civics ones, at least purchased by the end of the year and getting it done over time.
Okay, and then lastly, again, one of the requests that was made to the advisory board was to, as I stated a minute ago, was to not approve the 3% budget and to basically take it down to a 0 budget because of the COVID stuff and the economy and where it's at, and not understanding that. The recommendation was to not pay for step and COLA changes. That's not possible, correct? That's all in a contract. I just want to make sure that people who are listening, I know this answer because it's been explained to me much, but because it was asked of us, I want to make sure that the citizens who are dialed in and who are watching this live understand that that's not an ask that we are able to do. We can't just tell you that you can't pay your teacher salary increases in their health insurance. Correct?
Susan, we have 5 different agreements between
I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to explain that. Not that I didn't know that.
I understand exactly, and I'm trying to take that lead and explain that to everybody. So yes, we have 5 different agreements, with groups of people. So teachers, teaching assistants, custodians, etc. And then I believe close to 28 individual contracts, and every one of those are built over a 3-year period of time. And all of that they've all been negotiated, and they have increases. And so you would have to go back in and you would have to negotiate that. And so you'd be asking each of those unions, for example, to give up that COLA or what have you. And so that's it's not as easy as people think that it would be.
Could you just, again, just from being involved in all of this, I already know these answers, but just for the people that are watching this, because this one is actually, you didn't have to attend the Zoom meeting. You could just be watching this one live online. So I want to make sure that we address all of that. Could you also just take a quick moment and explain that to not to approve the 3% that you're asking for, to get down to 0, meaning we stay exactly what we're at and we ask for nothing, would mean you'd have to fire or release staff versus just being able to not cover what you're asking for in the 3%?
We would be looking at a $1.2 million reduction to what we need to just level service, keep the same level of services from this year to next year. $1.2 million is a lot of money. I wouldn't want to try to scare anybody and to give projections of what that would look like. But most of the money that we take in goes to fixed costs. There is very little discretionary money in our budget, things like copy paper and materials like that. The majority of it is fixed costs, contracts, heat, electricity, and staffing, insurance. And so when you're looking at $1.2 million, I don't know what that staffing would look like, but staffing would have to go. We would have no choice but to lay off people.
Right.
Understood. Thanks for the clarification. I would like, if Susan, is it Susan who's still on here? No, I apologize. Mike, I believe, had his hand up next. Mike, did you have a question?
Certainly do. So I remember from last year that there was $200,000 sort of a surprise expense in snow clearing.
Not that much.
It wasn't that much?
No. A fraction of that.
Okay, I'm gonna go back and look because this budget was prepared. Sorry, you didn't know what the snow was going to be, and I didn't know if that was going to affect facilities. I'll go back and look at what was presented last time, but remember it was a very, very high number. But I just want to, it was surprising last year, and I want to make sure that wasn't, still in the budget, or how you guys adjust for it.
Yeah, I mean, our snow removal is maybe $20,000 because we do all our snow removal ourselves, so it's all our custodians.
Mm-hmm.
So the only cost that potentially might be there is some overtime, depending upon when the snow comes. We own a lot of equipment. I think 2 years ago, when we had like 3 feet of snow in one dumping, we had to rent a front end loader for a couple of days. And then other than that, we pay for sand and salt and things like that. So it's not a huge expense. And we're not allowed to deficit spend on snow and ice removal. So we just build it into the budget. But yeah, it's maybe 25,000.
Right. And last year we had the ice storm, which closed us for a day and maybe one other snow day. This year we had one snow day for a small amount of snow, but we have not had an excess amount of snow.
I recall there was something, so I'll go back and look to see where I was mistaken. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Can I ask another question, Arthur?
Yes, go ahead.
Just in terms of, for Norfolk, we're doing some, I would say, pretty aggressive things to control employee health insurance costs, and 5% increase, 13 new people coming into the insurance. I'm curious what you're looking at to help improve what expenses look like on health insurance.
Well, Larry's going to answer that question, but before he jumps in, I do want to say that Larry has been aggressive in looking at healthcare costs over the last 3 years. 2 years ago, it only went up by 2.5%, and this last year that we're in right now, only 3%. And so when you're looking at health insurance jumps and you look at your town side, you're going to see, in general, that those are very low increases. But in addition, Larry has continued to do more. And I'm going to let him speak because that's actually what he does for us as a district.
So one of the things that we're going to be rolling out for next year, effective July, are what are called high deductible HSA plans. So where the premium is lower because the deductible is higher. And then it also comes with what's called a health savings account. So the employee can put money away similar to like a flex spending account, except the benefit of an HSA account is that the money rolls over from year to year and the money is portable. So if they change jobs or whatever, the money goes with them. So it's not like a use it or lose it like flex spending. So we're going to be rolling that out when we do our open enrollment in May. We're having some informational meetings later in April to our employees. And so that's one way that we hope we can reduce expense. And then we're also looking at other things. So right now we only have a 2-tier plan, so individual or family. One thing we're looking at is doing like employee plus one. So it would be somewhere in the middle of those two. So we're still in the process of analyzing the numbers on that and the cost and how that would work. So we're looking at that. We're also looking at some early retirement incentives with some of our employee groups. And so that's not necessarily health insurance per se, but it is a way to reduce cost. And even if we replace those people, you're going to save $10, $20, $30,000 probably if you replace a retiring person with a newer person at a lower step on the scale. So those are just a few of the things that we're working on to try to control some of those costs.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Hadid has been waiting for a while. Ed, can you go ahead and ask your question?
Yep. I know this isn't a presidential debate, but since my letter was mentioned, I just want to speak to it, Susan. I do understand the contractual obligations that when you have contractual workers and unions, I do understand that. And certainly that nuance didn't escape me, but I think Mr. Gizzi brought up a better point after that. In light of what's going on now and certainly the risks of funding both all of the towns and the school district, wouldn't it be reasonable to go to the unions and talk to them about suspending maybe for this year or half the year until we get a better feel as to what's financially down the road 6 months? We don't know. And I think that's really what the recommendation would be is once you let that cart out of the barn or the horse out of the barn, it's, what's left after that? Layoffs? I don't think anybody wants that. I certainly don't.
Any comments on Mr. Hadid's question or comments?
I guess, it's a broad statement and I respect Mr. Hadid's thinking on that. What I guess I would say is that you're talking about, again, 5 different organizations, 5 different units, plus, another 28 contracts. It's not as simple as one would think. And again, I think that what we have to do is respond to the situation as it unfolds. And that if in fact we were faced with an uncertain budget, if in fact we were not presented with the budget that we need to provide level service, then we would be sitting down as an administrative team and we would look at all the ways that we could trim the budget and try to find the ways that would in fact hurt students and our staff the least. At that point, it might be having conversations with all of those organizations, with all those units. It depends on how much we would need to trim at that point. It would depend on many, many factors. And so for me to say publicly that we would be doing something when we haven't been placed in that situation yet, I just think would be irresponsible on my end until we were able to look at all of the variables. I would tell you that if the worst happens and we receive cuts and we have to work with less than a level service budget, everything's on the table. I mean, we will be looking at every factor we can to try to make it work. The interesting thing about education when you don't, when there are budget issues is when, we have public conversations like this and people hear about the hurt that will happen, but the school's still open next September. And so people drive by the school and the school's still open, so they don't realize that there were actual cuts that did happen in those schools. Class sizes go from 25 to 30, situations like that. And if you don't have children in the school, you don't know about those things. And so we would have very thoughtful conversations about how to live with the budget that we were given, but make sure that our students felt minimal hurt in the process.
Thank you.
That's as I can tell you at this point.
Thank you very much. Kristen, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm going to play a Susan role and also ask some devil's advocate questions. And, I think people may ask, what did you all do back in 2008, 9, 10? So, how was that dealt with? Did you guys go back to unions at that point? So that's my first question. So I think people will ask that, what did we do back then? And then secondly, I'm sorry if I missed this, but did you all look at people that are not under contracts? I know that I think sometimes when these situations happen, you look at people that are management, unfortunately, and they will maybe accept not a COLA because they're not in the union. I'm not advocating for that, but I think people may ask that as well.
So first, the question 2008, 2009, 2010, I will tell you that Larry has been here a year longer than me, but I've been here almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years, July 1. So it would have to be kind of a trip down memory lane. We would have to, kind of go back in time to see, what was done at those particular times. And so I really would not want to speak to that tonight. And I would also say that I think every situation is different, and you had a different group of people here at that time. And I think I would stand by my response to you in that, whatever situation we have to deal with, we will do our best to deal with it. And I will bring all of the administrative team together, and we will thoughtfully weigh out all the pros and cons of every possible decision before we make that decision. And so that's about the best I can say there. As far as your other comment, everybody has a contract. Some of them are negotiated through a union, but I have a contract that the school committee, signed with me. I'm in, finishing year 2 of that. Mr. Azer, there are 28 individual contracts that have all been negotiated. They've sat down in good faith with myself or the school committee and negotiated that contract. And then there are unions on top of that. Mm-hmm. So that would be, it's not, just sitting down with one group or asking one person. It's much, much more complex than all of that.
Understood. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yeah, it's clear that once we approve the budget, the horses have left the barn. And so I guess I'm asking for Blythe and Kevin and Arthur, maybe somebody else, is like, so when the town doesn't have, when we miss our revenue projections and we can't pay what we've said we're going to fund, what's the mechanism? What do we do?
Blythe, I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. So the question is, if we get put on, you like this? Well, you came off mute real quickly. You were ready for this.
I was waiting for the question.
Well, here you go. The floor is yours.
So I would echo what both Ingrid and Paul have said, which is we don't have a clear picture yet. We're in the middle of the crisis. I know that next week, I was on a conference call earlier this week where I understand that the leadership at the state is going to be meeting next week and talking about revenue projections. And other town managers like myself are asking, we all know that there will probably be state aid reductions. We just don't know how much they'll be and when we will be told about them. But even with that, if you go back and look at the trend we gave you from 2008 to now, you can see that if the downturn started in 2007 and really caught in 2008, it wasn't until the town's budget in 2010 that there was a negative minus 0.49 budget approved. I'm not saying that we don't take this lightly and we don't start to make plans for that, but generally municipal revenue reductions take longer than the actual economic drop to hit home. Having said that, I would say that we need to get out somewhat the other side of this issue. We need to understand what those state reductions are, and we need to track our local receipts and see where we stand. I think we'll be in a much better position come the fall and special town meeting to understand whether we'll not be able to meet our obligations in 2021 and decide whether a COLA reduction, going to all Norfolk school unions and town unions would be an effective way to make up a gap, or if we need to go deeper than that. Todd ran some numbers today. And of course, once you've approved a budget for this school district, that budget is theirs. That's not something you can take back. I mean, we can work more with the Norfolk schools, but a 1% increase over a year is probably worth on just the non-KP side about $200,000. It depends on exactly who's working and so on. But those are the sorts of things we look at, and whether this best strategy is to go back and seek concessions or there's another way to approach it. But I would advocate that we need to wait a little longer so we know what exactly that we're going to negotiate for. I mean, unions have been doing this as long as any of us, and they know very well that the town has free cash, the town has stabilization. And until we can show them our actual deficit and what we are facing, they're not as motivated to come to the table and make changes. So I think it's important to wait for that a bit. And I know that may be stressful for residents at town meeting to say, well, gee, I might have lost my job, or I know somebody who has, and I'm not comfortable with this budget. But I would hope that we can impress upon them that we understand that, and when the time comes, we will absolutely do what we need to do, because the town must live within its means and plan for the next, unfortunately rainy day. I don't want to couch this issue like that necessarily, but we'll do what we need to do.
So Norfolk, town of Norfolk is clear, because you're here and you have control over that, and we can have those conversations. But as you just said, KP is a whole different ballgame, right? Like KP, yep. Like as soon as we say go, and what we're hearing from KP is they're gonna, the budget is theirs. They're not planning for this either. But is there a mechanism that we say? Well, you answered the question, which is there is no mechanism. We have to almost look at now.
Well, I would also point out that they are even more reliant on school funding, state aid, than we are. So it actually may be more challenging for them in some ways than it is for the town, because they're their own municipality. They don't necessarily have a stabilization account on top of free cash.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
I think it's important to say at this point, I can't stress this enough. I've been here just about 2 years, and Larry a little bit longer. I hope that the people who've been, participating in this call tonight recognize the fact that Larry and I have been coming to the table as often as we possibly can to talk with all of you about all of these situations. Although we're a regional district and we rely on all 3 towns to work together, we recognize ourselves as part of the Norfolk team. And we have been communicating with, sitting down with all of the departments in Norfolk, trying to work collaboratively. And again, we built this budget, we started it back last September, presented it right after the first of the year. And even back then, when it was voted on March 2nd, we presented a budget to the school committee, and the school committee approved a budget that did not ask for any increases, did not ask to build any new programming, any next steps for our students. It was solely a level service budget. And the assessment to Norfolk is well under 2%, 1.4 something percent. So I don't believe that we have at this point been irresponsible or thoughtless in what we've put forward. You know, we recognize where the towns are. We recognize where we all may be down the road. But like Blythe, I've worked in public for a long time, and I was, the last downturn, I was, a school administrator, just in a different town. And I know, as Blythe said, it did take time for it to catch up for us. And we faced those hard times and we made those difficult decisions. And when the time comes, we will be working with you to make the difficult decisions as well. But we need to know what we're preparing for. I can't give you in a public forum like this tonight an answer as to what we would do if we're cut, when we don't know if we're cut, and if so, how much we're cut. What we can do is move forward with the best education program possible. And if disaster happens for all, then we'll be right there at the table with every other department in Norfolk talking about how we can help mitigate that the best way we can while still protecting our children's education. That's
Thank you. Thank you. Mike, you had a follow-up question.
No, just thank you. That's why I was hoping to hear, and I think maybe that's the best you can do, is you'll be a partner if things go south for all of us.
Okay, very good then. We are at the 9 o'clock mark. I don't see any hands up, so I will express my gratitude and appreciation for the very complex budget information and context presented on King Philip. Thank you very much for the time. I know this was your 7th, I believe, time. I hope it's your last. I don't know. But again, a great thanks for going through all this material with us.
If you have further questions, please, I can't stress enough, you know how to reach us, and Larry and I would be very happy to sit down with anyone at any point and answer any, well, I'd say sit down. At this point, we'll probably have to computer, but we'd be happy to go through any questions that people have.
Excellent. Susan, you had a final thought or question you wanted to share on the subject of the KP budget?
Yes. Paul, I just wanted to say that I was actually here when the major cuts happened a few years back. I attended all of the school budget committee hearings and was part of all of the giant process that it was. I was not on advisory at that time, but I was very involved with the schools. And I would like to say that I have seen both on advisory and as a parent of a King Philip student, I have seen a huge improvement in the way the school budget is designed and dealt with since you've come on board. So I didn't know if anyone has actually expressed that to you, and I just wanted to let you know that I, for one, as both a parent and an advisory board member, notice that it is different. I notice the amount of work you're putting into it. I notice that your numbers are coming in lower, and yet your accolades are higher. So I just wanted to make sure that someone, with all of the stuff that's going on in this town, and everyone's very upset about the schools and being out and viruses and town meetings being pushed, I wanted to make sure that no matter what happens at town meeting, if the economy is tanked and people are upset, I do think it should be said that you're doing an excellent, excellent job. Just wanted to say that.
Susan, thank you. I appreciate it tremendously. And, I would be remiss if I didn't point out how fortunate I am to have Larry, who's been on this call tonight. Larry has really been exceptional. And I think, one of the reasons why he's here is because of some of the difficult times. We're very, very fortunate to have him behind the scenes, crunching the numbers. And quite honestly, you have an exceptional administrative team. I've seen it more than ever over the last few weeks as we've been working through all of this, difficult time. And so I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Excellent. And with that, we will say goodnight to you both. Again, thank you, gentlemen. And I will go through the remaining items on our agenda, which was publicly listed as reviewing the warrant would come next. There is not a warrant in need of review right now. Correct, Susan?
Correct.
And therefore, we're not going to go over any warrant articles. We're not going to have any votes. Next week, we will be entertaining. Do you want to just give a preview of next week's agenda, Susan?
Sure. So next week, my plan is to have Chief Stone, Chief Kenny, to invite Mr. Haddad. And I apologize, I don't remember the individual's name that Mr. Haddad gave me, who actually filed the petition.
Howard Rand.
Howard Rand. But Mr. Haddad has indicated that he's going to speak to it. And Jay Tallerman has asked to join as well, to speak to the citizens petition. So that's the plan for next week, the two chiefs and the citizens petition.
And I know there were some folks who were expressed interest in discussing the citizens petitions tonight. Most of the action will happen tomorrow. Did folks still want to share something, David, about that?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do the selectmen have to vote, or the select board, apologize, have to vote on this before it even is part of the warrant, or what's the deal on that? Can
On
they?
the citizens?
Yeah.
So a citizens petition, my understanding, and I hope I'm correct, a citizens petition, I don't believe is voted on by the select board. It's brought in by citizens, and
Goes straight to the warrant.
Yes, it does. That's my understanding.
Okay.
Maybe Blythe, is Blythe still with us?
I am.
Am I correct on that front, Blythe?
As long as for an annual town meeting, as long as the petition has signatures of 10 registered voters, it automatically goes on the warrant. And I think what we sent you today was include both sides of the petition, and you'll notice that there were more than 10.
Okay, so it qualifies and it's in. Jonathan, did you have any comments you wanted to share with us about that? I know you raised your hand earlier.
No, nothing for tonight. We'll save it for next week.
Very good. Kristen, you had a comment? And you're still muted. There you
Unmute. Oh, sorry, to hit it 3 times. Yeah, and just I'm assuming we clarified that this question that there can be a citizens petition that is related to an elected position, right? Because this is telling the town moderator, which is elected, what he or she has to do for appointing. We determined that is allowed, right? From like a legal perspective.
I can jump in. A citizen's petition can be on whatever topic a citizen wishes it to be. And so in this one in particular speaks to one of the town's bylaws and how that committee is formed. What the Attorney General's office might say about it, if it passed town meeting, was sent in to have our bylaws approved, I couldn't say. We'd have to ask town council that question. But on its face, just about any topic could be submitted, whether it's within whether a topic is within the purview of town meeting. That would be something town council would advise us on at the time when that came up. But I haven't spoken to him specifically about this, but I think overall there's generally no issue with it.
Okay, thank you.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I would now like to just remind people who maybe not have seen the notice that our moderator, Jay Tolleman, has nominated a 9th member of the advisory committee. Kiara, wanted to welcome Kiara Moore. I'm pronouncing that correctly, Kiara, yes? Yes, okay, thumbs up, outstanding. So thank you so much. She's still here after 2 hours and 10 minutes, so that's a really good sign. Hopefully that correlates highly with people coming back. So we really appreciate her service and volunteering for that. Jay's appointment is being acted on by the clerk to get you sworn in. So hopefully by next time you will be voting in the whole shebang. Okay, after that, the only other item was to approve minutes, which I don't think we have any minutes to approve. Susan, is that correct?
Like me to speak to that, Susan?
I think Susan's muted, Susan.
David and I, pardon me?
Would you like me to speak to that?
Whatever.
I've been going through the meeting minutes from the early February meeting with the planning board, and I'm trying to make it make sense because it was kind of a scattershot meeting in terms of participation.
Okay.
So I apologize for that, and I haven't really even looked at the last meeting. So I will hopefully finish up both, and we'll have at least 2 meeting minutes for the next meeting to vote on.
Okay, I appreciate that. You are a minutes machine, so thank you very much.
No, not yet.
Well, you're working up to it. It's
Yeah.
more of a goal, perhaps. Okay, so are there any other? No, I don't see anyone's hands up, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So I hear motion to adjourn by Mr. Lutz, and who seconded?
Susan.
Susan Klein. Okay, we have a motion and we have a second. I'm gonna have to do a roll call vote, aren't I? Okay, this is exciting. So, and do we technically need to vote to adjourn?
No.
Your predecessor said no, by the way, but who knows?
Jackie, you
Want
have
to
your hand
practice? We should practice.
I just wanted to say I have the Passover Seder next Wednesday, so I'm not going to be here. I don't know if that affects other people.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's do a roll call vote. So David Lutz, on the motion to adjourn.
I just clicked yes. Did you see it?
Oh, well, you have to
You got to
verbally-
use your voice.
Oh, never mind. I clicked yes.
Hey, for once
yes.
you're using the technology correctly and you're ahead of the game, but yeah, that doesn't apply. So that's a yes.
Yes.
Jackie Katz,
Yes.
Jonathan Hurwitz,
I'm going to abstain. I like talking to you guys.
just wants to keep a good thing going. I understand. Brian Bichkowski,
Yeah.
Kristen Baelish,
Yes.
Mike Huff,
Yes.
Susan Klein.
Yes.
Everyone's names are jumping around. Jackie Katz.
Yes.
Excellent. Did I miss anybody? Don't think so. Okay, so we have one abstention. That is close to unanimous. Works for me. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all back next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Same link, and please look for the attachments on the town meeting calendar.
Oh, Arthur, can I jump in for 1 second?
Yes, Susan, go ahead.
So just to let everybody know, today we met Blythe and IT and some other department heads. We met today about where we're going to be posting the material for our meetings. And all of the meeting material will now be posted on My Town Government. It's pretty easy. You go to the meeting date, you scroll down, you'll see the links there to get the documents. I'm going to do my best I have to post by Monday. So I'm going to do my best to post the meeting and post the materials at the same time. So unless something comes into me a little later in the game, you'll be able to have all of that for a couple of days before our meeting. And it'll be, from here on out, it'll be something that we do on a regular basis.
Okay, so go to My Town Government, click on Norfolk, and the listing appears.
And well, you have to go to the advisory committee, or an easier way maybe is to go on the norfolk.ma.us. You'll see the meetings on the right-hand side. Just hit that meeting. It'll take you right there.
I'll send out a reminder link to everybody the day of the meeting. Thank you for that update, and thanks for everyone's work getting all the attachments and such in one location. Okay, thanks everyone.
I will have to
Have a
ask
good night.
Jackie to help me figure out how to look at this stuff during the meeting.
Okay.
Print it
That's a
out,
good
Dave.
idea.
You can go old school.
I don't have a printer that's big enough to handle all this crap.
All right. I do if you need me to do it for you.
173 slides or 123
No.
slides.
Yeah, I hear you.
Whatever.
A great point to end the meeting. Thanks everyone. Signing off.
Thank you. Good night. Be well.